The ancient Greeks had no central heating, no insulation, and temperatures that dropped below freezing. Yet they didn't just survive winter, they thrived through it. And the method they used? Most historians won't even talk about it because it sounds absolutely insane by modern standards. When you think of ancient Greece, you probably picture sun-drenched beaches, philosophers lounging in togas, and maybe someone dramatically throwing a spear at the Olympics. Yeah, that's not the full story. Northern Greece regularly dropped below 14 degrees Fahrenheit. And I'm not talking about some freak weather event. This happened every single winter. Mountain regions, buried under snow for months. We're talking about conditions that would make your average Canadian nod with respect. Herodotus, the guy we call the father of history, wrote about Greek soldiers literally freezing to death during winter military campaigns. Not dying in battle, freezing, standing there, spear in hand, turning into popsicles. Here's what nobody mentions in those travel brochures. 80% of Greece is mountainous terrain. That's not a typo. 4 out of every 5 parts of the country are mountains. And mountains mean brutal, bone-chilling winters. Aristotle himself spent considerable time writing detailed observations about frost patterns. This wasn't some hobby. The man was documenting a genuine threat to daily survival. When one of history's greatest minds is taking notes on ice formation, you know the cold was serious business. Archaeological digs have revealed something fascinating. Greek homes in Macedonia had walls twice as thick as those in coastal Athens. Twice. These weren't design choices for aesthetics. People were literally building fortresses against the cold. But here's my favorite detail. The ancient Greek winter month called Gemalion was considered so absolutely miserable that Greeks scheduled most of their weddings during it. Why? Because they needed something, anything, to celebrate. That's like planning your birthday party during a root canal just to make the experience slightly less awful. Makes sense, right? The sunny Mediterranean paradise we imagine existed, sure, for maybe 4 months of the year. The rest of the time, ancient Greeks were fighting a battle most of us never hear about. And their homes, those mud brick buildings we think of as primitive, turns out they were engineered with a level of thermal intelligence that would impress modern architects. Here's the thing about Greek architects. They were obsessed with heat. Not in a weird way, in a survival way. Every single doorway faced south. Everyone. This wasn't some aesthetic choice or religious thing. They were chasing sunlight like my uncle chases early bird specials. During winter, the sun sits low in the sky. A south-facing door catches those rays and pulls warmth deep into the house. Simple physics, zero electricity bill. Now let's talk walls. Greeks mixed mud with straw to create bricks that basically worked like ancient thermoses. The straw created tiny air pockets throughout the material. These pockets trapped heat for hours after the fire died down. Pretty clever for people without YouTube tutorials, right? But wealthy Greeks? They took things further. Their homes featured central courtyards that seem counterintuitive at first. Why put a hole in the middle of your house during winter? Well, these courtyards blocked wind from hitting the main living spaces while funneling sunlight exactly where families spent their time. The walls surrounding the courtyard absorbed heat all day, then radiated it back at night. Basically, a giant solar battery made of mud. And windows? Forget about them. Most Greek homes had tiny openings or none whatsoever. I know that sounds depressing. Honestly, it probably was. But losing light meant keeping heat, and Greeks chose warmth over a nice view every time. Here's where it gets really interesting. In northern regions like Macedonia, builders actually sunk their floors partially underground. The earth stays around 55 degrees year-round, so half your floor is already warmer than the frozen air outside. Genius move. The average Greek home measured roughly 230 square feet. That's smaller than most modern living rooms. Heating a shoebox is way easier than heating a mansion. Makes sense, right? These building tricks kept families alive. But even the best designed home needed one critical element at its center, something that burned day and night, month after month, the hearth, and the Greeks treated it like a member of the family. Now let's talk about the one thing no Greek home could function without, the hearth. This wasn't just where you cooked dinner. This fire burned from the first cold day in autumn until spring finally showed up. We're talking 6 straight months of flames, never letting it die, ever. And families took this seriously. They arranged their entire sleeping situation around it like some kind of ancient slumber party. Grandparents got the prime spots closest to the flames. Kids, they slept on the outer edges. Sorry, kids. Seniority rules. Here's something that might surprise you. Greeks didn't just toss any wood into that fire. They had a whole system. Olive wood burned slow and steady. Dried grapevines caught fire quickly for a fast heat boost. Charcoal gave off intense heat without much smoke. They rotated between these like a DJ mixing tracks. But wait, how did smoke escape without filling the house? Simple. A hole in the roof. That's it? No fancy chimney, just a gap. During blizzards, they'd partially cover it with a stone or hide to trap more warmth inside. Genius? Absolutely. Fire hazard? Also yes. Now here's the part that really got me. The average family burned through roughly 2,000 pounds of firewood every single winter. 2,000 pounds. That's basically a small car made of logs, which meant summer wasn't just beach season, it was wood gathering season. Every family member spent months collecting, chopping, and stacking. Miss this step? Freeze in January. The Greeks treated their hearth with almost religious devotion. Actually, scratch that. It was literally religious. The goddess Hestia ruled over the hearth fire. Every meal started with an offering to her. First portion of food went straight into the flames. Why? Because Greeks genuinely believed neglecting Hestia would make your fire die. Superstition? Maybe, but when your family's survival depends on that flame, you're not taking chances. One thing, though, the hearth couldn't go everywhere with you. So what happened when you needed heat in the bedroom or the workshop? That's where things get creative. Now here's where Greeks got creative. The central hearth was great, but what happens when you need heat in another room? You can't exactly pick up a fire pit and carry it around. Well, the Greeks figured that out too. Enter the brazier. Basically a metal basin sitting on legs, filled with burning charcoal. Portable heat. Revolutionary stuff for the ancient world. Wealthy Greeks owned several of these bronze beauties scattered throughout their homes. Poor families, they made do with a single clay pot filled with embers. Not glamorous, but it worked. My grandfather used to say the best inventions come from people too stubborn to freeze. He wasn't wrong, but charcoal wasn't cheap. We're talking about 3 times the cost of regular firewood. So why bother? Simple. Charcoal burns cleaner, way less smoke, and when you're heating a tiny enclosed space, smoke becomes a real problem real fast. Nobody wants to choose between freezing or suffocating. Then there's the hot stone trick. Greeks would heat rocks directly in the fire until they were practically glowing. Wrap them in cloth, tuck them under your bed, stuff them inside your clothing. Instant portable warmth that lasted for hours. Sounds primitive, right? Well, it's the exact same principle behind modern hand warmers. The Greeks just used rocks instead of chemical packets. Public buildings got in on the action too. During winter sessions of the Athenian assembly, officials sometimes distributed heated braziers among the crowd. Democracy works better when your teeth aren't chattering. And the weird part is, some Greek homes had something even more advanced. Underground flues that channeled warm air beneath floor tiles, basically radiant floor heating, 2,000 years before anyone trademarked the concept. These weren't common. Only wealthy households could afford such elaborate systems, but the technology existed. The Romans later perfected it with their hippocaust systems, but Greeks got there first. Portable heat sources kept Greeks alive when the main hearth wasn't enough, but staying warm required more than just fire. It also required the right clothing, and Greek winter fashion was surprisingly sophisticated. All right, let's talk about what Greeks actually wore when temperatures dropped, because that flowing white toga you're picturing, completely useless in a blizzard. The basic chiton, that simple tunic everyone wore, came in seasonal versions. Summer meant lightweight linen, winter meant thick wool, and often 2 or 3 layers stacked on top of each other. Fashion took a backseat to not freezing. Then there's the himation. This was essentially a giant wool rectangle about 9 feet long. Greeks wrapped it around their entire body like a sophisticated burrito. You could cover your arms, your head, even your face if the wind got nasty. One piece of fabric, endless configurations. But here's where it gets interesting. Shepherds and mountain folk didn't bother with refined woolens. They wore rough cloaks made from untreated goat hair. Scratchy? Absolutely. But the natural oils in goat hair repelled rain and snow like primitive Gore-Tex. These guys knew something city dwellers didn't. Looking good matters less than staying dry. Footwear changed completely between seasons. Those elegant sandals Greeks are famous for, stored away by November. Winter brought out enclosed leather boots, often lined with wool or fur, some versions laced up to the knee. Basically ancient snow boots minus the trendy brand names. And the Pilos cap, this deserves attention. Workers and travelers wore these felt domes everywhere during cold months. The manufacturing process involved beating wool fibers until they compressed into a dense, weatherproof material. No knitting required, just raw wool and a lot of hitting. Now, the Spartans. These guys wore a single red cloak regardless of season. Summer heat, red cloak, mountain snow, same red cloak. Other Greeks thought this was absolutely insane. The Spartans considered extra clothing a sign of weakness. I personally think they were just showing off, but their military reputation meant nobody said that to their faces. All this clothing kept Greeks functional during cold months, but staying warm while standing still is one thing. Fueling your body through winter? That required a completely different strategy, one involving foods that would surprise most modern dieters. Winter meant one thing for Greek families: eat what you saved or starve. Fresh vegetables, gone by November. Fresh fruit, a distant memory. Everything came from massive clay jars called pithoi, some standing taller than a grown man. These containers held salted fish, dried figs, preserved olives, and enough barley to last until spring. A typical family needed 5 months of food stockpiled before the first frost hit, and the Greeks knew exactly what to eat when temperatures dropped. Hot barley porridge called maza became the breakfast of champions. But here's the trick. They mixed it with generous amounts of olive oil. Not for taste, for calories. Fat meant warmth. Your body burns calories to stay warm, so Greeks loaded up on cheese, nuts, and pork during cold months. My grandmother used to say the same thing about butter in winter soup. Turns out she was channeling her inner ancient Greek. Now let's talk about wine. Greeks always diluted their wine with water. Drinking it straight was considered barbaric, something only uncivilized peoples did. But winter changed the rules. Less water went into the mix. Sometimes they heated it entirely, creating something like an ancient mulled wine. Imagine sitting around a smoky hearth, hands wrapped around a warm cup. Not bad for 2,000 years ago. Honey played a surprising role too. Greeks used it as medicine, mixing it with hot water to soothe throats wrecked by constantly breathing smoky indoor air. Remember, these homes had fires burning for months with just a roof hole for ventilation. Everyone basically had a perpetual cold. The weird part is how precisely they planned. Families calculated exactly how much preserved food they needed by October. Run out in February and you faced serious trouble. Markets still operated during winter, but prices skyrocketed. Supply and demand existed long before anyone named it. Food kept Greeks alive. But staying warm inside your home was only half the battle. What happened when you actually needed to leave? The answer involves public bathhouses, gymnasiums, and one surprisingly clever use of olive oil. Now here's something that sounds almost too modern to be ancient. Greeks had public bathhouses, heated ones, and during winter, these places became the great equalizer. A poor farmer could walk in, pay a tiny fee, and soak in the same warm water that rich merchants enjoyed. Your house might be freezing, but for a few hours you could feel like royalty. But the gymnasium? That was clever in a different way. We think of gyms as places to build muscle. Greeks saw them as heating systems for the human body. Seriously, when it's cold outside and you can't afford enough firewood, what do? You run. You wrestle. You throw heavy things around until you're sweating despite the temperature. Athletes had another trick. Before exercising, they rubbed olive oil all over their skin. Sounds strange, right? Well, that thin oil layer actually trapped body heat and blocked cold air from hitting bare skin directly. It's like wearing an invisible edible jacket. And the wealthy? They took things further. Some Greek mansions had private bathing rooms with fires burning beneath raised floors, hot water on demand, warm tiles underfoot. Meanwhile, my ancestors were probably huddling around a clay pot with 3 burning sticks. Then there's the cold plunge. Greeks loved alternating between hot and cold water, even in winter. They believed temperature contrast strengthened the body and improved circulation. Modern science actually backs this up, which is annoying because I hate cold showers. Aristotle himself weighed in on winter exercise. His recommendation? Keep it moderate. Generate enough internal heat to stay warm, but don't exhaust yourself. Overdo it, and you'll sweat through your clothes. Then when you stop moving, that wet wool becomes an ice blanket. Not ideal. The gymnasium essentially became a social heating strategy. Men gathered, exercised together, discussed philosophy while warming up, then headed home with elevated body temperatures that lasted for hours. Smart, practical, and free. But all that activity and bathing eventually leads to one thing: sleep. And Greeks had very specific opinions about how to survive the coldest hours of the night. Now here's where Greeks got really clever about the coldest hours of the day. Greek beds weren't just mattresses thrown on the ground. They were raised wooden frames with ropes stretched across like a hammock. Why bother? Because sleeping directly on stone or packed dirt floors was basically asking for hypothermia. That few inches of air between you and the frozen ground made a massive difference. The mattresses themselves, stuffed with whatever you could afford. Poor families used straw. Middle-class Greeks packed theirs with wool. And the wealthy? Feathers. A good feather bed cost roughly what a laborer earned in 3 months, worth every coin when January hit. But here's the real survival hack that might make modern people uncomfortable. Entire families slept together. Mom, dad, kids, grandparents, all in one bed. And before you cringe, think about it practically. 4 or 5 bodies generate serious heat. It's basically free central heating that never runs out of fuel. The blankets mattered too, but not in the way you'd expect. Greeks didn't use one thick cover. They layered multiple thinner woolen blankets instead. Each layer trapped a pocket of warm air. 5 thin blankets beat one heavy one every time. Pretty smart for people without thermodynamics textbooks. Some families took things even further during brutal cold snaps. They brought livestock inside. A couple of goats or a small pig radiating body heat could raise the room temperature by several degrees. Sure, your house smelled like a barn, but you weren't frozen. And sleeping positions? Greeks actually had recommendations. Curl into a ball, tuck your knees to your chest, minimize your surface area. Aristotle wrote about this. The man who cataloged everything from politics to dolphins also had opinions on how to sleep without freezing. I've tried the multiple blanket trick during a power outage last winter. It actually works, but staying warm at night only solved half the problem, because winter wasn't just about surviving alone. Greeks had to keep entire communities alive through months of brutal cold, and they developed some surprisingly sophisticated systems to do it. Surviving winter alone? That's a losing game. Ancient Greeks figured this out fast. Winter festivals weren't just about honoring the gods. They were survival strategies disguised as parties. The Lanaya festival happened during the coldest month, and thousands packed into heated temples together. Coincidence? Absolutely not. Think about it. One brazier heating one family costs the same fuel as one brazier heating 20 people in a public space. Greeks were practical people. They understood group economics before economists existed. Symposiums shifted indoors when temperatures dropped. These weren't fancy dinner parties like movies show. Picture 15 guys crammed into a small room, multiple braziers burning, wine flowing, body heat stacking up. By midnight, you'd be sweating. That was the point. But here's what nobody mentions. Poor citizens had almost no heating options at home, so they spent winter days in public stoas, those covered walkways you see in Greek ruins, free shelter from wind and rain. Not warm exactly, but warmer than dying outside. Craftsmen's workshops became unofficial community centers. Blacksmith forges radiated serious heat. Pottery kilns stayed hot for hours. If you needed to warm up, you'd suddenly develop intense curiosity about metalworking. Funny how that works. And when things got truly desperate, city-states stepped in. Athens and other cities sometimes distributed firewood to citizens during brutal winters. Ancient emergency relief programs. Politicians understood something timeless. Frozen voters are angry voters. Rural villages took community survival even further. In early winter, they'd slaughter livestock together and divide preserved meat among families. Nobody hoarded. Nobody let neighbors starve. Selfishness meant everyone died. Come February, my grandfather used to say the warmest thing in winter isn't fire, it's other people. Cheesy, sure, but the Greeks built their entire cold weather strategy around this idea. Shared spaces, shared resources, shared body heat. Makes you wonder about our modern approach. We've got central heating, insulated walls, electric blankets, yet we barely know our neighbors' names. Now, community warmth worked great in cities. But what about Greeks living in mountain villages where temperatures dropped even lower? They developed techniques that would shock you. Living by the coast, winter was tough, but Greeks living above 3,000 feet? That was a completely different survival game. Mountain villages in places like Arcadia weren't messing around. Their stone houses had walls up to 3 feet thick. 3 feet, that's wider than most doorways. These weren't homes, they were fortresses against the cold. And honestly, they needed to be. Temperatures in these regions could stay below freezing for weeks straight. Here's what's fascinating, though. Many mountain Greeks simply refused to fight winter at all. They practiced something called transhumance. Basically, entire communities packed up in autumn and moved down to lower elevations. Then they climbed back up in spring. Sounds exhausting, right? But it beats freezing to death. Now, those who stayed put got creative, real creative. Mountain Greeks wore boots stuffed with dried grass for insulation. But here's the thing. They replaced that grass every single day. Why? Moisture from your feet turns insulation into an ice pack overnight. My grandfather used newspaper in his boots during cold winters. Same principle, just less grass involved. And the caves. Oh, the caves. Mountain communities discovered that caves maintain a natural temperature around 55 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. Doesn't sound warm until you realize it's 40 degrees warmer than outside during a blizzard. Families moved livestock into these caves too. You, your goats, and grandma all huddled together underground. Cozy? Maybe not. Effective? Absolutely. Food became another challenge. Stored supplies only lasted so long when you couldn't exactly run to the market. Archaeological digs at mountain sites show heavy consumption of wild game. Deer, boar, rabbits. Hunting wasn't recreation up there, it was survival. These mountain Greeks developed knowledge that coastal city dwellers never needed. Different clothing techniques, different shelter strategies, different relationships with the landscape itself. The weird part is most ancient accounts barely mention these communities. Historians focused on Athens, Sparta, the glamorous city-states. Meanwhile, thousands of Greeks survived conditions that would make modern hikers tap out immediately. But survival wasn't just about physical adaptation. Something else kept ancient Greeks going through brutal winters: